Only mode.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar titled, Is Your Brand Setting You Up for Success or Is It Holding You Back? And today's presentation is by CCIQ partner DMS Creative. My name is Amanda Wielden from CCIQ, and I'll be your facilitator for today. Our guest presenter is Director of DMS Creative, Kim Ebenestelli, and Kim is joining us today from Toowoomba. So welcome, Kim, and thanks for joining us.
Hi, Amanda.
Now, just some housekeeping tips. Today's webinar will run for approximately 45 minutes and will include a Q&A session at the end. So please type through your questions for Kim by typing these into the chat box that appears on your screen, and we'll be taking questions throughout the webinar. Also, you'll receive a copy of the presentation slides and the webinar recording via email later today, so make sure you check your inbox. So I'll now hand over to Kim and she'll take you through today's presentation.
Hello, and thanks again, Amanda, for the introduction. As Amanda said, my name is Kim Ebenestelli, and I am a director and owner of DMS Creative. We are a marketing and a creative design studio based in Toowoomba, and I have a particular focus on branding and the strategy behind building brands, and I've got a really strong and keen interest in visual communication. And for those who've heard me speak before, you'll know that I've also got a really firm belief that marketing budgets need to be invested very carefully and strategically so that you can ensure the best possible return on your investment. It's true that people do judge a book by its cover, and a lot of research that's available tells us that today's buyers make about 57% of their purchasing decision before they make contact with a company. And the reality is that your brand is what your potential customers are judging you and your business on and deciding whether or not you make their shortlist of businesses that they want to contact for a quote or for any other information. So before we go any further, I thought it would be really useful to spend some time discussing what it is or what a brand actually is. And branding is one of those terms that is used by people all of the time, and there's often quite a bit of confusion about what branding actually is. I mean, is it a logo? Is it your corporate colours? Is it the sign that's on the front of your building? And my answer to this is that those things are only elements of your overall brand. They are just small, although incredibly significant pieces in the overall puzzle. But far more broadly, your brand is actually the perception that someone holds in their head about you, your business, and the products and services that you offer. And the whole point of building a brand is so that you can control or craft the desired perception in somebody else's mind about you. You can help them to draw the conclusions that you want them to make. So the first essential thing to know about branding is that a brand isn't just a logo or a colour scheme, although that's a pretty common misconception. Rather, a brand is the promise of an experience. So this is actually a really important point, and so I'll just say that again. Your brand is the way that you communicate the experience that you're promising to your customers. And the way your customers perceive your brand promise versus the experience you deliver them can have a really major impact on the success or the failure of your business. I'm sure you can all think of an example of a business that you've dealt with in the past. They might have had a great product or service, but dealing with them is just plain hard work. And this is a really good example of a brand whose promise isn't aligned with the actual experience that you've had with them as a customer. They haven't managed your expectations well. On the other hand, there might be another business you can think of where they might not have had the most competitive prices, they might not have had the best selection, but you've really enjoyed shopping there or dealing with them. And this is an example of a brand whose promise aligns well with the experience. So why is branding important? Well, a good brand should act like a mirror. It should accurately reflect the quality of the goods and services you offer and your business's values and beliefs. If your brand experience marries up with what your brand says that it's going to deliver or promise, then your brand is setting you up for success. Again, as I mentioned before, it's really about managing expectations of customers. If your brand is inconsistent, if it's hard to recognise, and it's not a true reflection of you, your staff, your business's cultures, or your marketing materials, then it's most likely causing confusion with your potential customers and actually holding you back. Customers are fickle and they will use any excuse to look elsewhere, especially if their thoughts, feelings, and opinions change every single time they come into contact with your brand. Branding promotes recognition, and repetition of your brand in the marketplace promotes familiarity, and it establishes trust, which helps customers feel comfortable buying from you. Plus, from a HR perspective, a strong brand also provides motivation and direction for your staff, and most importantly, creates real value for your business. I mentioned earlier that 57% of a customer's purchasing decision is made before they come into contact with your business. It's human nature to want to deal with like-minded people. It's what our friendships and our social networks are all based on. People love to buy from brands that meet their expectations each and every time, and this forges referrals through word of mouth. When your organisation has established a clear brand personality and can deliver on the promise of the brand, then brand loyalty is likely to skyrocket as a result. A successful brand doesn't just happen by itself though, and it's usually the work of a well-considered and very strategic plan. And one of the more common mistakes that many small businesses and startups make is not taking the time to determine and to be really aware of the experience that they're promising to their potential customers through the way that they promote their business. So I've put together a list of what I consider to be some of the characteristics of strong brands. And there are 6 of them. The first is that they're authentic. The only truly defendable brand position is an authentic one. Any brand that tries too hard, feels forced, or seems to be a stretch can stand out, and not in a good way. The second is that the brand is attractive, and that the target audience finds the brands to be aesthetically pleasing. The colours, shapes, and typography need to work harmoniously, and the materials all need to be professionally designed and developed and accurately reflect the market position. The third is that there's absolute consistency across all elements of the brand. And this is twofold. The first is that each and every time you see the brand in application, it needs to be consistent. This consistency builds recognition, and this recognition leads to trust. And the other side of consistency is that everyone needs to be singing from the same chorus book. And so no matter whether the customer is reading the website, whether they're standing in store, or they're dealing with after-sales support, they're having a similar experience and they end up with the same feeling about the brand. Which leads directly to point number 4, which is dependability, that you're guaranteed the same experience each and every time you deal with the brand. And the 5th characteristic, that target audiences can actually relate to the brand. And finally, that the brand is a true reflection of the experience. Brands are becoming more and more like people. And like a person, a brand has a name, a personality, a character, and a reputation. And without realizing it, people automatically consider brands to have many of the same characteristics as people. So you might think of a brand as being professional, or knowledgeable, friendly or approachable, or perhaps unreliable or opportunistic. And just as you like to be around some people and not around others, there are some brands that you warm to and others that you just don't like. People have a character, and so do brands. People like dealing with like-minded businesses and brands and the whole process of branding is about ensuring your brand is one that your key target audience wants to engage with. So how do you go about creating and defining your brand personality so that you can attract like-minded customers to your business? Well, personally, I find it really useful to bring it right back to basics and really identify what it is that you want to say and to really hone your message. I like to start with the very basics of the personality that you want your brand to communicate to your target audience and to the world at large. Psychology theory suggests that all of our individual personalities are based on what are considered the master personality archetypes. And without going into a whole lot of deep psychological theory, we can take this concept and relate it directly to how you want your brand to be perceived by your target audience. Now, while this concept may be new to you, it's something that we all intrinsically understand as people. I've listed these master archetypes on the screen, and you can see that they're grouped into 4 major categories. So order versus change, and self-knowledge versus group belonging. Now, I thought it might be useful to help you understand the concept is to talk about what some of the major brands are doing. And so if we work through some of the archetypes within the order section, if we took the brand archetype of achiever, so some of the brands that have aligned or have taken that archetype and have based their brand personality on that archetype would be Nike and Adidas. To look at the archetype of ruler are brands like Rolex or Gillette or Jack Daniels, or nurturer would be Campbell's, Johnson & Johnson or L'Oreal. Conversely, on the other side of the wheel, to look at change would be the Maverick archetype, and brands like Virgin and Harley Davidson have really taken that on board. Dreamer would be brands like Disney or Harry Potter, or Connector, Facebook, LinkedIn, or Oprah Winfrey. If we're thinking about self-knowledge and we look at the intellectual archetype, then brands like Harvard and CNN have really taken that and run with it. Philosopher archetype, brands like the Church of Scientology and Nikon. If we look at group belonging, some of those brands would be, within Everyman would be CoverGirl or Visa. Sensualist would be Victoria's Secret or BMW or Versace. An entertainer would be far more fun-loving brands of Fanta and Budweiser. It's a really great starting point to think about the core of your brand. And while we've done some work recently with a peak body for an environmental protection agency, and their key brand archetype was that of Defender, with strong support from the motivator archetypes as well. Another client works in the rural real estate sector, and their key archetypes were Connector, with strong support from the traditionalist archetype. And you can see how these archetypes make sense for these particular industries, and how identifying these archetypes can help to provide clarity to the business owners so that they can ensure that these themes are really strongly reflected through all their marketing communications. And once you've worked out the archetype that best reflects your brand, the next step is to look at the values that support these. The reason that we think about the values is to go back and think about some of these brands. So even within Maverick, even though Virgin and Harley Davidson have both taken the Maverick archetype as the core base of their personality, the way that they execute all of their promotional materials, the way they position themselves is incredibly different. And that's largely driven by the values that they've identified for their organisation. So one of the things I think is really useful here is to start with some blank sheets of paper and add headings to the top of the page and literally just brain dump onto the pages. List the values that drive your business. Is it honesty, integrity, or as one client recently said in a session I was running with them, well, we shear the sheep, we don't skin it. And for them, there's a really strong focus on wanting to nurture long-term relationships rather than on short-term transactional deals. There can be real value then in the next step of thinking about how you want your ideal target customers to think about your business, how you want them to think about your staff, and how you want them to feel once they've used your products and services. And once you've got your head around all of that, next it's time to think about how your brand would talk, how your brand would behave, and how it would react in various situations. If, for example, the archetype that was most relevant to your business was entertainer, then it's unlikely that the way that you would write would be highly academic and formal. So given the entertainer archetype fits within the realm of group belonging, it's far more likely that your tone would be warm and inviting and kind of fun and a little bit more engaging. So regardless of which archetype you choose as the best fit for your business, when you combine it with the values that really drive your business and how you want customers to perceive your business, your staff, and how you want them to feel once they've used your products and services, you end up with your own unique brand story, which is real, true, and ticks the box for authenticity, which is the number one characteristic that all strong brands have in common. So now you're armed with the information that you need to be able to make a decision about whether your brand is setting you up for success or whether it's holding you back. So from here, I recommend what you do is you get out all of your marketing materials and all of the customer touch points, all of your forms or documents or anything else that your customers receive from your business, including your website, and actually read all of the words, each and every one of them. Critically look at all of the images, look at the design, and look at them as though it's the very first time you've ever seen them, as if it's the very first time you're being introduced to this brand. Think about it from the perspective of how you want customers to be perceiving your brand. Think about it from the perspective of the archetypes that you think best fit with your brand. Think about the values that you want to communicate. Think about the tone of voice that you think is appropriate, and see whether or not it's aligned with what you're actually doing. If you think it is aligned, then chances are your brand is setting you up for success. If it's not aligned, then chances are your brand is holding you back. So that's pretty much it from me, unless anybody has any questions.
Thank you very much, Kim, for that presentation. It is now time for our Q&A session. If you haven't done so already, just type this through using the chat box that's on your screen. So we have a couple of questions for you, Kim. Now, the first one is from Lisa, and she is actually part of a 45-year-old company, so her brand has been out there for a while, and she wants to know what are some of the considerations of doing a full rebrand, for example, business name change, versus just a refresh.
Lisa, thank you very much for the question. I think firstly, what I would be considering is why you would be considering a name change. If the business is 45 years old, is it because the name perhaps doesn't accurately reflect what the business does or the industry that the business is in? Or is it that there is perpetual confusion with the target audience? Is it perhaps that that the business has a reputation that that they want to escape or they want to change? There's a lot of thought and consideration that needs to go into changing a business name, particularly one that has got 45 years of history behind it. In terms of what would then be involved, well, I mean, obviously then it's almost the same sort of process of starting a new business. You need to register the new trading names and all of those sorts of things. The strategy behind a rebrand, you would have to really understand why a rebrand is necessary, whether it's simply what we often call in our industry a case of brand fatigue, where sometimes it's a case of because you're seeing the brand all day, every day, it looks very tired to you, not necessarily to your target audience. And I mean, if you look at Coca-Cola, they're probably a great example, where if you look at the very original Coca-Cola logo versus the Coca-Cola logo that's in existence now, it's only very subtly different. And that's an organisation that's obviously been around a very long time. So Lisa, I would be happy to have a further conversation with you if you're thinking about rebrand and discussing some of the strategy and the reason behind why. But I often say to people, if it's a case that if you're thinking it's looking a little bit tired, well, it might be that there's some minor things that could be done without a major rebrand. You might retain the name of the business. You might do a small tweak to the logo potentially, but then it might be some more contemporary typefaces, for example, that you might use in your marketing collateral as body copy as opposed to changing the logo. Or it may be that you refresh the imagery that you have, and it may be that you commission a photo shoot and go and get a whole new lot of photos done. Or it may be a shop refit or an office refit to try and make the organisation appear more modern. So there's certainly no need to dive right in and throw the baby out with the bathwater, if you will. When you're talking about branding, there's certainly a lot of other options and things that you can think about that are far less drastic, that might be far less expensive, that might get you the same sort of results that you're actually hoping to achieve with a rebrand. But of course, as I said, it depends on the reason why you're thinking rebrand in the first place.
And Kim, we have another person, Desi, who is in quite a similar situation, long-term company, but they're wanting to add some other extra services to their company. So they've traditionally been known as, so it's in the palliative care industry, they've been world knows them as that. They've been in it for years and years, but now they're wanting to add extra services like education and training. So is that necessary when you're adding something additional that you weren't always doing? Is that necessary to rebrand in that instance?
Again, no, I don't think you necessarily need to rebrand. I think that's more of an educational campaign. It's thinking about how you communicate your offering to the market. And so in that instance, it might be that, for example, you might want a new website as opposed to a rebrand. You might need some new marketing collateral, and you might need some targeted campaigns, particularly if it's a long-established business with a great reputation, and if you're moving from palliative care into education, and if that education is particularly related to that supportive and caring industry, then, you know, you'd be crazy to get rid of the goodwill associated with that brand and not leverage off it further. So, you know, again, I think there's loads of options and loads of opportunities to be thinking creatively about how to take your brand to new markets and into new areas, certainly without losing a lot of the goodwill that already exists with the brand that you have in place. Provided, of course, there's goodwill in place.
Excellent, thanks, Kim. Now, Mary Jane would like to know, how do we align our team to our desired brand?
Hi, Mary Jane. Thank you very much for that question. Mary Jane, I've been doing quite a bit of work with businesses on them wanting to align their teams and with their brand, and it's been really fascinating actually taking teams through the process of archetyping and values, and doing that in a workshop style situation has actually been incredibly valuable for these organisations. The way that it's translated to motivation within the team and those sorts of things has been pleasantly surprising to many of the business owners. They've been I've had a lot of feedback back from them that that's been the case. I think certainly when you've got an existing team and you're wanting to make sure that you're all on the same road and you're on the same journey, then that's useful. But I think once you're really clear on that yourself, it's something that you can be easily articulating at interview stage as well, so that when you're hiring, you're really clear on, you know, on the qualities you're looking for your team members, so that they can live the brand that you're selling. So when that's the case, and when you're in interview stage, you can actually weave that through the questions that you're asking, and you get a real sense then of whether they're going to be able to live the brand that you're selling.
Excellent. I have a couple more questions. Heather wants to know, in order to develop a personality for my business and brand, do I have to do a complete rebrand? Which I guess we sort of discussed that one a bit earlier with Lisa's questions, but do you have any other comments to add on that for Heather?
Heather, I would say if your brand is, you know, we talked before about the 6 characteristics of strong brands, and, you know, those being that the brand is authentic. And the thing about creating the personality is really making sure that that's resonating through the values and those sorts of things. But the other ones were about your brand being attractive and aesthetically pleasing to the target audience. So if you can tick these boxes, then my answer is no, I don't think you need to rebrand. It's just really about learning how to make your brand work and thinking about how to communicate your brand to your prospective target audience in a way that really resonates with them. So the first ones, as I said, is about building that authenticity. The second is about your brand looking attractive and aesthetically pleasing to the target audience. The third is that the experience that they're constantly been receiving is consistent, and that consistency being replicated in the way that the brand is reproduced across the board, leading into, obviously, the feeling that the brand is dependable, and that the target audience can relate to it. So, you know, if those things are all being ticked, then no, you don't need to rebrand. You know, rebrand typically means, you know, a whole lot of money when you're rebranding, because you need new logos, you need all new stationery, you need all new signage, new uniforms, new vehicle wraps, and, you know, all of those sorts of things. And there are times that that's absolutely necessary, but there are a lot of times that really you could be investing that same money into developing the brand further, and actually being able to really get some runs on the board.
Nick wants to know, he has a retail store and believes he has quite a simple product. Does he need a brand personality, or is this something that is more relevant to service industries?
Hi, Nick. Thank you very much for your question. Nick, I personally believe that every single brand needs to really be thinking about what their brand personality is so that, they can help attract the right target audience into their brand. I certainly don't think for one moment that brand personalities are more related to service industries. To think about some retail examples, if you think about Lorna Jane as a brand, there's some great brand personality things there, the way that they've really aligned themselves. And so people who want the same things are looking for, they want great fitness and they want to look good while they're working out, and they want they want to look fashionable, and they want comfortable clothing that works with them, that's great quality. So, in that kind of instance, there's really great brand alignment through the development of a brand personality through Lorna Jane, for example, with that specific target audience. If you think similarly along the lines of convenience stores and you think about 7-Elevens, or you think about the Night Owl brand, and you think about how they're aligned themselves with people that want that particular service, I think there's absolute scope for developing your brand personality regardless of whatever industry you're in.
And just a final question we have from Bronwyn. Today's presentation, I guess, has really covered those that are already in business and assessing their brand. But what would you suggest, any other tips or anything that you do differently for someone who's looking to start up a business?
Hi, Bronwyn. Thank you. That's a great question. Bronwyn, I would say if you're thinking about starting up a business, then I think you're in the most brilliantly perfect position to be having all of these thoughts at this stage. To be thinking about what it is that your business and your brand is going to stand for. To make sure from that very first point that you understand the target audience that you want to work with, that you want to attract into your business. And I suppose once you've got that target audience in mind, thinking really realistically then about how you present your business and your brand in a way that really appeals to them. As we said, people want to deal with like-minded businesses. So, it's really great to, before you've even had your logo designed, to think about the brand archetypes. And in fact, when we're doing logo design for businesses who are starting out, we often go through a brand archetyping exercise where we get them to identify the brand archetypes that they want to espouse throughout their business. And once we understand that, then it's a really great launch pad for us to be able to really help communicate their brand the way the way they want it to be communicated.
Excellent. That's all the questions we have time for today. Thank you, Kim, for taking time to present today's webinar, and thank you for tuning in today. You'll see Kim's details on the screen. If you have any questions, she'll be more than happy to assist you. Also, everyone who has registered for today's webinar has automatically been entered in the draw to win a 4-hour strategy session think tank with DMS Creative, and that's valued at $990 and will be conducted in Toowoomba. So you're all in the draw to win that, and this will be drawn on the 3rd of July with the winner contacted by CCIQ. And it's basically just an intensive 4-hour facilitated discussion, helping you to identify your brand's personality and drill down on some of the items that was discussed in today's webinar. So don't forget to check your emails today for a copy of the presentation slides and webinar recording, and also check the CCIQ events page for any upcoming events and webinars. Enjoy your weekend, and we look forward to having you at another webinar in the future.